Fantastic. Thank you, Jane. And I'm Sue Minter. I'm the Executive Director of Capstone Community Action. I use the she, her pronouns, and I am going to help facilitate the meeting today as Kaya is having internet challenges. And I welcome folks who are able to at least introduce themselves on the chat. And I don't know, maybe we could read out who's here. Sarah, if you would just run through the agenda. I know that's the first item, and I'm just going to say this is the convening of the Just Transition Subcommittee of the Vermont Climate Council meeting on Thursday, July 15th. Thank you for joining us. And we're going to start by just running through the agenda quickly.
Thanks, Sue. Folks hear me okay? Yeah, there we go. It's switched to me. Okay. So I put the link for the agenda in the chat box. It was also publicly posted and sent to members as well. So the first thing is just our review and approval of the agenda in the minutes. Then we are going to do a member spotlight. We had taken a little break from that, but Kelly's going to do our member spotlight this morning, or this afternoon, or whatever time of day it is. I clearly need to breathe and just center for a moment. And then Jared Duvall is here with us from the Energy Action Network. He's the executive director there, and he's also a climate council member, and he's here with some colleagues, and they're going to share a little bit about the energy and equity data that EAN has, and really are here to have a conversation with us about it as much as anything. So really glad to have them for the first part of this meeting. We plan to pause at 5 o'clock for public comment. And then our consultants from Climate Access are going to join us around 5:10 and share with us the public engagement plan that they have drafted based on coming out of conversations with stakeholders. And I think there'll be a great conversation around that. And then we'll come back to business at the end of the meeting in terms of reporting back from other subcommittees and other and from Dean, oh my gosh, Dean as well. So that's the proposed agenda today.
Great. I just want to ask if anyone has any objections or changes to the agenda. I will want to start actually before we move to our member spotlight with an introduction that Virginia is bringing a potential new member to our group. As you may remember, our former co-chair, Nadia, has had to step away from us, and she was such an amazing asset, and she's going to be hard to replace. But we did reach out, and thankfully, Virginia has brought someone to join us and for us to meet and for her to sort of get a sense of us and see if this is something she'd be interested in. So Virginia, would you kindly introduce briefly Mona?
Absolutely. So hi everyone. So let me introduce Mona to you. Mona is originally from Egypt. She came to the United States as a visiting science a couple of years ago, and she lives in Vermont system. She holds a PhD in veterinary science from the Faculty of Veterinary Medicine at the Cairo University in Egypt. And in addition, she earns a second PhD in food science from the College of Agriculture at the University Guelph in Ontario. She's a bilingual in Arabic and English. She finds passion in helping and advocating for a community. Per her own word, Mona would like to see minorities get access to cheaper green services, equal participation in ecosystem restoration. She wants the underserved to increase their green energy literacy, gain equal access to all economic benefits from climate action initiative, in addition to fair access to green technology. She also wants this population to learn more about best practices. Mona's hope in joining this council is to convey the concern expressed by the marginalized communities and communicate the initiatives and missions of this group to the community. Here is Mona. So Mona, can you please confirm what I said and maybe I invite you to add anything you may wish to add. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. I am, pleased to join this, and I hope that we are going to be learning together and convey all what you're doing. Virginia also give me some small information about your committee and what you're doing, and I really want to convey all what you're doing to my community and try to also educate them because most of them, they don't have this access to any of this information in their own language. So none of them knows about what is green energy mean, what should we do to save our planet, they have no clue. So from joining this committee, I hope that I can just convey some of your messages to them in their own language so they can be participating in this very good initiatives.
Thank you so much for joining us today, and we welcome you. And perhaps through our process today, you'll get a sense of us. We'll have, if you please feel welcome to join the conversation when inspired to do so. We do have a lot on the agenda, so I am going to move forward to our member spotlight, which is Kelly Klein. And Mona, we have been trying to get to know one another by offering time at our meetings to just do a spotlight. So Kelly, thanks for introducing yourself to us in a deeper way than we already know you.
Oh, thank you for inviting me to do so. So yes, I'm Kelly Klein. I am a member of the larger council as a representative of small businesses in our community. And happy to tell you a little bit more about my background. So I grew up in Delaware, in Wilmington, Delaware, where I attended a Quaker school, which in 10th grade, we had a required class, which was peace, justice, and social change. So I did start early in my education, focusing on issues of justice and things like that. So that was a really interesting, informative class. And one of the things that I found from that was that a lot of us felt very frustrated because we felt like we had no power as youth, and we wanted to be able to do something, and hearing about all the ills of the world and all the problems, but not feeling like we had any real power to make change was sort of the sense that everyone had in that room. So that's just something that I've carried with me, but also learned a lot about more about what was going on in the world than I was really aware of as a 10th grader. I attended Middlebury College, which is how I first came to Vermont, and fell in love with the state. But moved around the country and bounced back and forth coast to coast, and then finally ended up in Des Moines, Iowa for a while, where we were there because my husband had an internship. But I ended up being an AmeriCorps Vista in Iowa, working with Iraqi refugees. And this project was formed because there were a lot of Iraqi refugees were coming to settle in Iowa. This would be in 2009 that I started with this. Some had been there for a couple of years, and the existing refugee resettlement programs Iowa was the last state-run one, and it was actually shut down while I was doing this project because there was a law that they all have to be privately run. The government really says, "Yay, come to our country," and then it's Virginie can tell you more about this, I'm sure. But almost all the resettlement programs are run by private agencies, and they're all nonprofits. And it's really interesting to see what that effect is. So there's not a lot of support there. I mean, there's a lot, but there's not enough. And we started this nonprofit to help the Iraqi refugees who were some of the most recent arrivals. And so there weren't a lot of people who spoke their language and had been here long enough that they could help with the newer arrivals. And we wanted to try to say, like, there's a lot to learn, and there was not a lot of support for learning language or just navigating the culture in general. So it was a really interesting experience where I got to meet a lot of wonderful people and work really closely with some of the refugees who felt like they were a little bit more settled, and I learned so much from them about what their experience was and how we could help support people further. And the nonprofit, we ended up actually closing because after a few years, we found that we weren't needed anymore. The refugees who had been there longer were feeling really confident, really settled, and were doing so much more than we could do to support the new arrivals and help them become adjusted and understand how to navigate the new world that they were finding themselves in. So I spent about 3 years doing that. It was really fascinating, but I decided I didn't want to stay in the nonprofit world. And so we also realized we really wanted to come back to Vermont because we love it here and wanted to have our family here and everything. So we moved back to Vermont in 2013 and started our business, which is Grunfell Meadery and Havoc Mead. We have 2 brands. So mead, if you're not familiar, is an alcoholic beverage made from honey. And the type of mead we make is more like a beer or cider. So you'll find it in 16-ounce cans. And we started brewing that style because we couldn't really find it anywhere. We were like, we would like to drink this. It doesn't exist. Tons of beer out there, tons of great cider out there, but this was something that was new. So we started our adventure as business owners, and it's definitely an interesting world, especially being in manufacturing, because we have to deal with a physical product and we need a physical space. So we started out in Colchester, right behind the Costco, for those of you who are familiar with the area. And then just 2 years ago, we moved up to St. Albans. We have a facility up here. And so I live in Swanton, so I'm up in the northern part of the state. One of the things as a business owner, we really wanted to make sure that we've always been committed to wanting to create good jobs, do the right thing by our community and our planet. And we joined VBSR, Vermont Businesses for Social Responsibility, a little ways into our business ownership. And then about a year and a half ago, we became an official certified B Corp. So for those of you who aren't familiar, both of these basically focus on having a triple bottom line. It's not just about profit. It's also, we have to focus on the planet and people. And VBSR is a wonderful community. So I've gotten to connect with other business owners that way. And then being a B Corp, we actually have to prove that we really are living up to these. They do a lot of examination of our company, and we have to have documentation showing that we're not only are we doing lots of things that are important for supporting our people, or our employees, but also our stakeholders and our wider community and the planet in our practices. And then we also have to keep improving. So it's a really high bar, and it's been a fascinating journey, really making sure that we're really living up to what we believe and not sliding in some areas because, I'm busy, focused on other things. So I'm really glad that we have done that, and we're continuing to focus on how we can really make a difference. So for example, we recently put a solar array on our roof. We have made sure that we are giving everybody health insurance, which is not easy as a small business. It's really expensive. So seeing how we have to make tough decisions as business owners, and one of the things is that a lot of small businesses don't have a lot of cash just sitting around, and a lot of these things either take a constant output, like paying for health insurance, or what's trickier for a lot of small businesses, there's an upfront cost. So for example, to get solar, we had to get loans. We had to, convince lenders to give us money for this thing that really, in the end, it's the same as paying a power bill. It's like, it should be a no-brainer, but there's like all kinds of lawyers' fees and things like that came as surprise upfront costs. And the same thing goes with other projects. We switched now that we own a building, we're able to do things, which is very exciting for us, to be able to make green initiatives. The first thing we did was switch one of the office section of our building from very high energy rooftop units that were gas for heat and electric for air conditioning, and just spend a ton of energy just blowing air through fans. We switched to air source heat pumps, And I have to say, I'm glad we have them, especially because now that we're solar, our heat is all electric and solar powered. So this is lovely. But the upfront cost, and even though we were able to finance it at a really good rate, there were like things that didn't get captured in our loan. Our loan payback is not necessarily cheaper than just paying for the expensive rooftop unit and keeping on running older technology and things. So we have had to balance these decisions. And so that's one of the things that I hope to bring to the council and a little bit to this group as well, because a lot of our business owners in Vermont are small business owners, a lot are sole proprietors, and women and minority-owned businesses are less likely to than male white-owned businesses to be incorporated and actually have access to like that. If you're not incorporated as a business, you're not going to have access to a lot of the same loans and things like that we've been able to get. And then at the end of the day, cash flow is such an important thing, and not being able to make the right decision because you don't have enough for the upfront costs. Even if you're getting a loan, there are still upfront costs, is something that I think a lot of business owners have to struggle with and weigh the cost and benefit. So that's something that I'm hoping to just be able to bring my experience. And then I am connected with several different other networks. So I mentioned VBSR. I'm on their public policy committee. So I've been involved in some of the policy work from that side. It's really interesting to be now seeing it from the other side to some extent. I've been a longtime member and board member of the Women Business Owners Network. So through them, I've heard a lot about what has been going on with COVID and what some of the struggles of women-owned businesses and gaining access to funding. And that's where I've heard between VBSR and WBON how with the funding that was available for women-owned businesses and minority-owned businesses, a lot of people had trouble accessing it just because they didn't necessarily have the training or resources for being able to fill out all the paperwork, have all of the financial documents, or even some people just weren't even incorporated and couldn't access it for that reason. So I've seen some of that through my work with those organizations. And then I also have some connection to Main Street Alliance of Vermont, which my husband is on their board. So they also connect with a lot of small businesses. And my hope is that I'll be able to meet with at least some folks from these organizations and get some other people's stories. So it's not just my experience, but through my time with these organizations, I've also heard several different stories that I hope to share with us as time goes on. So I think I kind of hit on most things. I don't know, it was pretty rapid fire. I know we don't have a lot of time, but if there are any questions or anything, happy to answer them.
Any questions for Kelly? I have one. Your background wasn't in business, it didn't sound like, but you leapt forward in coming back to Vermont to start a business. And I'm wondering what inspired you other than what you explained as a taste for mead.
It's interesting. So my husband and I both wanted to be able to spend time we wanted a family, we wanted kids, and we wanted to be able to spend time with our kids. And we bantered different things back and forth. And starting a business seemed like the best way that both of us could spend a lot of time with our kids. And we do. Even before COVID, our daughter was with us 24/7, which can be a little exhausting, but it's wonderful. And that was the biggest thing, is we wanted to have something where we could really spend time with our family. And I think both of us also had some sort of little bit of a small business bug. The fact that, I started a nonprofit and also worked as a freelance math tutor, and we both had little things like that in our background. So I think there was a little bit of that. Just couldn't say no to the idea of starting some sort of business, and we threw around a lot of ideas, and mead kept coming back in for some reason. So here we are.
Lovely. That's a great story, and it's so great to have your perspective on our team. Any other questions or thoughts from anybody?
Oh, and the unanswered or unasked question, my degree is actually in mathematics because, you know, I just kept doing it. I was like, I'll stop if it gets too hard. And I was like, this is actually really fun and interesting. So,
That must be why you had confidence to start a business, something that I wouldn't dream of having confidence in.
it's funny that the math that I did in college has almost nothing to do with what I do now, but it taught me how to solve complex problems and think about things in that framework. So that I do carry with me.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Kelly, this is sort of, the timing is right. I want us to, if we're all set with that wonderful member spotlight inspiration, I think we'll move to sort of the next big part of our agenda, which is really learning about the perspective that and the great work of the Energy Action Network. And I'll just turn it over to you, Jared Duvall, who is a Climate Council member and director of EAN, to tell us what EAN is, and then share your sort of key things from your annual report that are so important for our work.
Thanks so much, Sue. I'm really glad to be with you all today. I'm really glad that I got to be here for your story, Kelly, and to learn more about you and your work. And yeah, so what I wanted to do was just briefly, as Sue said, introduce EAN, Energy Action Network, some of the key takeaways from our recently released annual progress report, especially some of the data collection and analysis we've done focused on energy burden and energy equity. So energy burden referring to the share of total income that has to go to be spent on energy, with a look at the two biggest cost burdens that Vermonters face when it comes to energy, which are transportation and heating. And then spend a little bit of time on what this transition could mean in terms of moving from a very inequitable status quo to a much more equitable and beneficial future for Vermont, if we're able to tackle this problem of fossil fuels, which is not just a problem of emissions, but of really high and unpredictable costs for folks. And then at the end, I want to share a couple of things that are coming up for the network that may be opportunities that folks may want to engage in, and want to make sure that there's time for any questions or suggestions that you have, because we've really been digging into energy equity research in the last couple of years, but really want to deepen and expand that. And we see this group as a source of good ideas and advice as we think about that. And I'm really glad you will meet shortly. I'm really glad to be joined. Our EAN really refers to two things. So let me actually just go ahead and share my screen for the intro slides. Can folks see that?
Yep.
Great, thank you. So this is the cover of our recently released annual progress report. It is available online at our website, eanvt.org. But let me just start by saying what Energy Action Network is. It's a collection of over 200 member organizations, basically any organization or business or college or university, utility, any entity that wants to be part of helping Vermont meet its emissions reduction commitments and renewable energy goals. So you can see this is just a small illustration of some of our members there. We also work really closely with what we call public partners, federal and state government, especially when it comes to data tracking and analysis. So as you can imagine, with a network this big and broad, there are many competing opinions about what we should do, what pieces of legislation should be supported. And so this is the mission of the network, to achieve our climate and energy commitments in ways that create a more just, thriving, and sustainable future for Vermonters, very similar to the work that you all have been focused on. And I just want to say, I am so appreciative to be with you, because I'm so appreciative of the work that you've done on the principles that you've been developing for the rest of the council. I also serve on the or I should say, I serve on the Science and Data Subcommittee and the Cross-Sector Mitigation Subcommittee, and the work you've been doing is incredibly important to guide that. So in support of that network, we have a small nonprofit organization of 3 staff, and I'm lucky to be joined by the whole team. I might just ask Cara and May to briefly introduce themselves and their role so that you all can know them and put a face to a name. Maybe Cara, if you want to start briefly.
Hello, everyone. I'm Cara Robicek. I'm the network manager, and it's really nice to be here with you.
Hi, everybody. My name is May Butler. I'm the data and dashboard manager at EAN. I'm also happy to be here.
Thanks, Cara and May. So, the role that the 3 of us play as a support organization for this network is to be a neutral convener, to help facilitate conversations, and also to be an independent and trusted source of data tracking and analysis. And the main way that we provide that information analysis is through this annual progress report that we recently released. So yeah, there's the team. You can also see us in the other windows. And these are the 5 key takeaways from our report this year, that meeting our emissions reduction commitments is not just a moral responsibility, now a legal obligation and requirement, but also a massive opportunity, especially because, finding number 2, the benefits and costs of our energy status quo, especially of our fossil fuel dependence, are not currently being equitably shared. Third, we've done modeling. This was led by May, about what it will take for Vermont to meet the Global Warming Solutions Act emissions reduction commitments. And that modeling has found that the requirements are achievable with already available technologies and best practices. And that when we make that transition, there is the possibility to make sure that Vermont consumers and workers benefit from reducing fossil fuel dependence, but that we will need to expand our focus from primarily in the past what has just been about policy and regulation focused on the electricity sector, to also focus on the sectors where most of the pollution and the costs are coming from, especially transportation and heating. So there's a lot more in the report. I really just want to focus with this group on some of our analysis on energy burden, especially by income group in Vermont. So, as I said, energy burden is looking at the share of income that is spent by Vermonters on energy. There's been a lot of great work in this space. Efficiency Vermont was an early leader. They do an energy burden report every 2 years, and that really helps provide a geographic sense of where costs are faced and where they're higher and where they're lower. And as we wanted to do more equity analysis, we said, okay, great. Efficiency Vermont has done a lot of good geographic analysis. When we looked at kind of racial equity questions, one of the challenges we ran into, which I don't think will be a surprise to this group, is that there was a real lack of available data. A lot of what we rely on is American Community Survey data or Bureau of Labor Statistics, and oftentimes the sample sizes that federal surveys or state surveys get for Vermont aren't big enough to allow us to have statistically, have confidence in some of the disaggregated results by demographic groups, group by race. But what we were able to start doing was really look at what does the energy burden differentials, what do they look like by different income group in Vermont? So this is just a graphic that we put together that helps try to tie some key themes together. And that is, no matter what your starting point focus is, whether it is where does most of our climate pollution come from, or where are most of the energy costs facing Vermonters? Yes, electricity is important, but we also need to focus on these elephants in the room in terms of transportation and heating. So let's start with transportation. We unfortunately were not able to get recent data from specific to Vermont. So this is data from the Northeastern United States, the National Household Travel Survey from a few years ago. And what we see is that lower income folks spend or consume less transportation fuels, and that rural folks are consuming more transportation fuels than urban folks. I think oftentimes there is a myth out there that lower income folks consume more fossil fuels or consume more energy than upper income folks. But it's the data doesn't bear that out. Upper income folks are doing a lot more leisure travel, discretionary travel, and that's why you see these numbers on the right. But in contrast, even though lower income folks are consuming less fuel, what they are consuming takes up a far greater share of their income. Rural folks in the Northeast, almost 10% of their income being spent just on transportation fuel. This doesn't even talk about vehicles or maintenance or insurance or a lot of the other costs that go in. And if you look at consumer data from like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, it finds that transportation is the second highest household cost in the United States after housing. And this again breaks it down urban versus rural, and folks who are in rural areas facing, have a higher share of their total income that gets spent on transportation. So when we're talking about energy burden, talking about existing inequities, here's a major one. Even though low-income folks are much less responsible for fossil fuel pollution, their energy is costing them a lot more than it is for wealthier folks. We see this is not surprising if you look at average annual miles traveled. The lowest income folks on average are only driving 10,000 miles a year, whereas upper income folks, on average folks making over 100,000 a year, they're driving 15,000 miles a year. Lower income folks are driving some of the oldest vehicles, which are less efficient, means they're more costly to run in terms of fuel efficiency and in terms of more frequent and more expensive maintenance. So again, people with the least income driving the most expensive vehicles because that's what they can afford in terms of used cars, whereas folks who are upper income on average are driving cars that are closer to only 8 years old. And it's particularly problematic that lower income folks are historically kind of driving older vehicles because a lot of the newer vehicles, like hybrids, like electric vehicles, are much less expensive to own and operate. So this looks at all of those costs of transportation and says per mile traveled, how much does it cost to operate one of these vehicles? And we can see that there's a massive potential for cost savings for folks who are in hybrid and electric vehicles, both because of fuel savings and maintenance savings. It's not surprising why those savings can be so significant when we compare the costs of different types of vehicles. Gasoline and diesel have generally been much higher cost overall and much more price volatile. You see this roller coaster here compared to what are generally lower cost and much more price stable prices for electricity. And this is just the average. You can be in a EV charging program with Green Mountain Power or Burlington Electric Department that brings it even lower, and hopefully more utilities will follow. But if you're in Green Mountain Power territory, charging your EV is like the equivalent of paying $1 a gallon. Just a couple more slides quickly on some of the transportation data, and then we'll move to heating. I think it's really important that we distinguish between the starting price of electric vehicles versus what the price can be after incentives, because what we're seeing is that there are many electric vehicles that are becoming more accessible to both moderate and lower income folks once all of these incentives, because of really intentional work that's been done by groups like SUE's, like Capstone, and like the Agency of Transportation to really design programs, whether mileage smart or incentives, or the Replace Your Ride program that emerged out of a Energy Action Network action team that is really focused on lower income Vermonters. When you add those incentives together, that starting price of a Nissan Leaf can can be cut in a third, or in, under $10,000 for folks. So I think that's important. There's also been great research that's come out recently showing, specific to rural Vermont, comparing the cost savings that are available for folks when you drive an EV. There is very little maintenance. There is no fuel filter changes, no oil changes, no spark plugs, fewer moving parts. I lease an EV, I've had for 2 years. The only thing I've done is change the tires. And what that adds up to, when you also add the fuel savings, can be $1,500 a year in savings. So these were our takeaways. I already stated them, so I won't, say them again, but I'll share this slide deck in case folks are interested. And maybe before I move on to the heating sector, I'll just pause to see if there are any questions or comments that folks have on some of that transportation related analysis.
I just going to launch in very quickly. Thank you for stopping, because I was going to suggest you do that. I think before we launch into home heating, as you mentioned, Capstone and the community action agencies have really been working in this space of thinking about transportation, and the program Mileage Smart offers incentives for used EVs and hybrids. And what we've seen, my question to the group is, we see that there's a challenge in getting success in this program. We think that we have a marketing challenge, which I hope we can really work with all of you to break some of the barriers, but somewhat of a big educational effort to help drive home that point that it is actually lower cost if we can get you into, and we're going with used, so the capital is low, relatively speaking, but those long-term costs are so much less. And I will just say, a huge challenge for the people we serve is keeping their cars going, and the expense that people spend relative to their income just to be able to get to work, to get to their doctor's appointment, to get food. And it's such an imbalance that we're really thinking creatively. But I'm wondering if others can comment on both the challenges in the transportation sector and maybe some opportunities to address this, if you have them in your sphere of connection. And go ahead and just speak up if you have a thought, because I can't see the if you're raising a hand.
Oops.
I have a question, Jared. This is David Plum. In your analysis, are you looking at other components of transportation beyond the EV piece, such as reducing vehicle miles traveled and sort of all the questions about public transportation and that kind of stuff?
Yeah, that really that shows up in the report, but especially in our pathways analysis of the many different options we have in the transportation sector to reduce fossil fuel use. I mean, many folks do need a vehicle to get around, especially in rural Vermont. But for folks, there are different options out there that involve transit. New models around on-demand micro transit, which is really exciting and more flexible in meeting people's needs, where they're at. Yeah, so I tried to trim this presentation a bit, but there is a bunch in there in the report, especially on the pathways analysis.
Right.
And David, it's hard for me not to pipe in, just because I was the former Secretary of Transportation, and we have done so much in Vermont to invest in public transportation and to reduce vehicle miles traveled. But frankly, in our rural state, public transportation and the cost of it, and I think of us as a very high relative to other rural states, we've invested. But we can't meet the needs of very low income people to get their basic needs met. And that's why these other initiatives, whether it's helping to get folks into cars they might be able to afford, or these community on-demand kind of services that Ross is with us, and he has really supported some micro transit initiatives. But it's never going to meet the needs. So we have to think differently and build off of our public transit system in new ways is sort of where I'm coming from anyway. And that's why the electric vehicle gives us the possibility of reducing, we don't need to worry about VMTs as much as getting people into the lower emission cars if we can help make them affordable. But I'm so curious by other people on the call, if you see barriers, cultural barriers in your communities of people actually moving toward the electric vehicle or the hybrid vehicle.
This is Kelly. There's one thing that, and this is sort of ties back to one of the things I was talking about. It's like the upfront costs versus you have long-term benefits of upkeep. And Jared, you talked about this in the video that you shared. I don't know if everyone had a chance to watch it. It's excellent if you didn't. But yeah, if you're trying to figure out what the cost is, a lot of times that first sticker price tag, if it's higher without having to work in, oh, but I'm not going to have to do oil changes. I'm not, it can be really hard to justify it if your monthly payments are going to be higher, for example, or if the tax incentive, if you're really low income, the tax incentives, I think some of those are just like a tax rebate, but if you don't really owe anything in taxes, then it doesn't help you. But I could be wrong about that.
Unless you're leasing, and then the value of that tax credit can be reduce the cost of the lease. But certainly that's true. If you're buying, you would have to have that tax liability and may not be able to fully claim it.
But Mileage Smart is actually a reduction in the price that goes directly to the dealer. So we don't have that challenge for that purpose, for that reason.
Yeah, so that's there, and I think there's a lot of education. I think that's a big piece of it is understanding, but probably it's going to be the dealers. And then my other thought was about just how many used electric vehicles are there? You know, they're pretty new. And so a lot of the used cars are just not going to be electric. And so I don't know what that market looks like, but that's going to be the other thing. And in my experience with my employees and everything is, yeah, transportation is a big issue. A lot of them are driving really, really old vehicles and not just sort of across the board, across income. It's not very common that people are going out and getting brand new electric vehicles or even used electric vehicles. They're still driving the same old thing. And then they're anxious all winter that it's going to break down or get stuck and not going to be able to get back up the hill to the house and things like that.
I want to say that in my community, most of the people that come to me and share about their will to buy a car, share that the dealer offer already used cars, and those are, cars that run with gas. And the second thing is that families are large, so they need big cars. And for the most part, those electric cars are small, so they cannot accommodate, large families.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, sure, Virginia. I think that's really important. And I think one of the encouraging signs is that as more and more models come out, including larger vehicles, like I think there's over 36 electric vehicles available in Vermont now, and now more than a dozen of them are, all-wheel drive, either standard or optional, and bigger. So certainly that first wave, we're really small, but we're starting to see more and more of the larger ones that will hopefully meet more people's needs, including the first really, more mass market pickup truck coming next spring with the F-150 Lightning.
Yeah, I want to say something if it's okay. And I think in this low-income families, they need more education about, this hybrid and electric cars. I really don't know what is the models available. Where can I charge them? I don't know anything about them. So I think a little bit of education for us and for the people who are, they don't know English will be, good idea to start with, educating them about this kind of cars.
Before we move on, I wanted to, thanks, Mona, sorry, Jared, I'm just going to respond.
Oh, I was just going to ask if Sue or others on the call are aware of, some of those resources. I know a great general resource is the Drive Electric Vermont website, which helps people kind of sort through different options, but it's mostly about newer cars now, but a lot of those vehicles are also used, so like you can find out more about like a used Nissan Leaf or something like that in terms of like what its range is and what its size is in terms of if it could meet your needs. But it's a good question that I don't know the answer to in terms of if there's more specific information about used vehicles, or if some of the information that is up on Drive Electric Vermont is being translated for different communities. I don't know.
I was going to add something different, which is just that you had a great slide up there that looked at different income levels and energy burn. You had a couple slides to that effect. I think one of the things that's always striking to me, yeah, that's a good one, is household that makes less than $25,000, or even frankly less than $50,000, it's a pretty low income household. And that's where you really see the striking difference around energy burden. But a lot of times we're using this data to justify or make the case, sorry, I don't want to be sort of overly dramatic, to make the case for solutions that are really geared towards like the $50,000 to $80,000 a year household. It's just very striking, I think, because I think about like a household that makes less than $25,000 in Vermont, or a very low income household, or extremely, what we would call even an extremely low income household, and they may not even own their own home, right? So I feel like we're missing a big piece of like, well, why aren't those households buying EVs? Well, where are they going to charge them at the end of the day? So I think sometimes it's some things like that we just kind of, this data is so compelling. It like clearly tells a story, but to me it misses some of the actual story. And I wonder how we could augment this with some of those voices to really kind of help us answer the question that I think was being posed, like, well, why aren't really low-income households buying EVs, used EVs, when we have great incentive programs? So let's dig into that more, and maybe it's not just a cultural thing. Yeah. So anyway, it's just an observation. And
yeah, I want to pipe in, and then we should probably move on. Sarah, you're so right. And I actually went to a presentation today that EAN, one of the interns, has done, looking into just this, not only mapping where those charging stations are, and now Efficiency Vermont is going to be doing a more detailed focus group investigation of what are these barriers, both pragmatic and cultural. And I think they're all of the above. And I do want to also mention Sarah's working, as are we, on a whole new program to think about how do we give counseling, to your point, Mona, and hopefully not in multiple languages and culturally appropriate, to help folks not just understand their choices in energy use in their home and in their transportation and otherwise, but and the benefits of switching, but to also do financial counseling on how how you can actually make use of these incentives, because that is a whole big challenge that many people do not have the tools to utilize. So those are challenges we're trying to pick away at as we progress. Thank you so much. Maybe we should move on, and we'll have more time for discussion when you finish about the homes or the thermal, whatever.
Okay, so the first, I just want to pick up on something you just said, Sue, and ask folks to save the date if they're interested in a lot of these energy equity topics, because we have two phenomenal summer interns, as Sue said, doing great research for us right now. And we have scheduled on August 12th a lunch and learn where both Raquel Smith and Ellie Curtis, our interns, will be presenting their reports and their findings. So I think Cara is going to share that link in the chat if anybody wants to sign up for those lunch and learns and hear more about some of the emerging research and share some more questions. And then, you know, I actually, just in the interest of time, I could breeze through some of the heating stuff, but I actually want to make sure we get to the, you know, it can almost be summarized by it's a very similar story on the heating side, right? Lower income Vermonters purchase less heating fuel. Upper income Vermonters usually live in bigger homes and, you know, are using more heating fuel. But you look at the share of income that heating cost, this is actually combined heating and electric costs, takes up for the budget. The energy burden is again higher here. And this is just the fuel, again, not the systems or the maintenance. So a very similar story here. We see that there are differences in terms of the heating fuel types by income. And we also see that there are differences between folks who own homes and folks who rent homes. I'll just pick out one example here that I think is particularly problematic. If you look at the lowest third right here of income earning renters, a full fifth of them, 20% of Vermonters in that under $40,000 group are still heating with resistance electric heating systems, which is the single highest cost way to heat your home. The next two highest cost ways to heat your home, and that are very price volatile, are propane in the gray and fuel oil in the purple. So again, if we're talking about a transition where folks can be heating with efficient heat pumps here in the blue, or renewable heating fuels like sustainable wood heat, we can help move folks to much lower cost curves that are much less price volatile. So major opportunity there, and for the Vermont economy overall, because Vermonters on average over the last decade have spent about $2 billion a year combined on fossil fuels for transportation and heating. And that's 100% imported. And it varies by fuel, but on average, 75 cents of every dollar that we spend on fossil fuel drains out of the Vermont economy. Instead, when we're looking at these alternatives, like investing in weatherization, so we're not throwing money out the window, which Sarah can talk a lot more about, as can Sue and others, or when we're heating with heat pumps efficiently with electricity or with wood heat, a far larger share of our energy dollars stay and recirculate in state. So we're not just talking about the potential for energy cost reductions in folks' budgets, but also a positive feedback effect in terms of investing in the local economy and helping create local jobs. In Vermont, 6% of the jobs, which is the highest share of any state in the country, are clean energy jobs. And on average, there's a lot of variation within that clean energy category. But on average, the median wage for a clean energy employee is $27 an hour, whereas the statewide median is closer to 19. So if we're looking for, in this transition, good family supporting, well-paying jobs, a lot of the clean energy jobs can help provide that. If we stop doing this, $1.5 billion leaving the state economy anymore every year, and start having much more recirculation because we're investing in, paying our electric utilities that, local electric utilities or local wood pellet fuel providers or biodiesel providers, rather than ExxonMobil and multinational fossil fuel corporations.
Can I ask a question? I'm sorry, this is Jennifer. Can you tell us exactly what you mean by clean energy?
Yes. So broadly speaking, I think it starts with efficiency, energy efficiency. So weatherization on the heating side, and so there's that. Then I think primarily the lowest polluting sources of energy are usually going to be using electricity, especially in Vermont, where our electricity portfolio is 93% carbon free. And there are other ways to measure it, but no matter how you measure it, likely the lowest emitting electricity sector of any state in the country. So massive emissions reductions when we're moving to transportation or heating with electricity. but then there are situations when that alone is not enough or desirable because you want backup systems. So there are other options that are renewable, like advanced wood heat, heating with local wood pellets, which is certainly not, I mean, different folks will argue it's carbon neutral or not, but no matter how you look at it, it is usually almost always much carbon better than any of the fossil fuels. So yeah, I think that's a great point about the unique distinctions between clean energy versus renewable energy versus no emissions versus low emissions, but generally talking about efficiency, electrification, and some renewable fuels.
I raise the issue because we've gotten more information lately that there may well be a much, much higher carbon impact for things like big hydro with methane and short-term harm from that, which will speed climate change. And so I just think it's really important that we be really clear about what we're talking about when we talk about clean energy. And it's also relevant to your point about what people are earning within each of those different sectors. I suspect there are differences in wages based on the type of energy that people are working in.
Yes, definitely. And I would just offer that the Science and Data Subcommittee of the Council is working with consultants to the Council to look at exactly the questions you're raising about how we make sure that we're really carefully and transparently assessing the emissions impact and profile of different energy sources, both on a direct basis and also on a life cycle basis. So I want to make sure that in the last minute, I note, and if you have follow-up questions, please be in touch with me or Kara about this, but we have sent out a request for pitches, which is sharing your ideas for how we can meet the Global Warming Solutions Act targets in a way that advances equity and is going to help improve quality of life for Vermonters. So there are a number of different teams across the network that have formed in the past year that have advanced things that have been contributions to improving energy equity. Sue has been involved in a number of them, as has Sarah and others, from weatherization at scale to replace your ride efforts and more. And I think Kara has put in the chat that, if folks want to learn more about, even if you don't have an idea, this is really just the seed of an idea. If you want to get together with some other EAN network members and talk about where do we stand now, what's needed now, what would be really effective, what would make a difference to both advancing equity and reducing emissions, and you want to be in conversation with some other folks, we're hosting some sessions that we would love for you to join, and we would invite folks who have ideas to share them. And our summit will be on September 15th. I think those are the main. Kara or May, please let me know if you think we missed anything.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out, I've put a lot of things in the chat, but I know that's not accessible necessarily to everyone. So people can email me if they want more information about any of the things that were discussed or any of the opportunities. That's cara@eanvt.org, and I'm sure that Sue or Sarah can send that along to people if they're interested as well.
Amanda does our minutes, and she's usually great at catching that stuff in the chat box and adding it in. So thanks, Sarah.
Thank you so much, Jared. I want to just check in if there are questions or comments from our group, and then we do have time for public comment. Thank you so much for being on time, Jared. Any other thoughts? I'm going to do a pitch for the summit where you'll get lots of interesting pitches. And I want to, we'll, as we get closer to that date, really pump it because it's a great, inspiring opportunity for new ideas.
Did you read the chat? Because I wrote a note in the chat that for Jared, I think this council need, or this IEN need to reach out to people, and they need to educate them, translate this information to different languages so the people they know about it. this is my first time even hearing about this EIN. So, and we have a lot of people like me, not only me, who doesn't know.
Mona, it's so great to have you with us. And this is exactly why we need people, including yourself and others, who can help connect the dots. This is exactly what we know we need to do. And hopefully you can help us with that. And I think your point about language is huge, obviously. I'm going to just...
There is another comment in the chat box as well, which is from Kelly. So Kelly, I don't know if you just want to ask your question. Or I can ask it for you. She just asked about whether EAN has looked at renewable natural gas much as part of your work. And there's renewable natural gas at their commercial building, but the house isn't piped with gas. And so she just didn't know if that was a viable option or if you wanted to weigh in on that, Jared.
Yeah, and I thought May replied. May, if you want to.
Yeah, I was just going to say I just submitted a response. And we do include some analysis about RNG for the thermal sector side of things on the emissions reductions pathway modeling that we've been doing. And there's some like caveats about that related to emissions factors that we're aware of, and that's an ongoing conversation, but we do have that included right now as a pathway that we're thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like renewable natural gas along with biodiesel and you know, are especially sensitive to decisions made about whether we're looking at direct kind of burner tip emissions or whether we're looking at life cycle emissions, which if folks are interested, we may, or I could talk more about, but that's probably good for now. But I know that the Science and Data Subcommittee is looking at that as we dig into methodological questions about the state's greenhouse gas inventory.
Yeah, and I think these are deep questions about which lots of people are discussing. And Jared is a great connection to Data and Science Subcommittee, as you know, but I think at this moment, we're going to focus on sort of EAN as this organization doing this kind of work. And I think the point about energy burden is something we really wanted to make sure that everyone is at least grasping. And there's many ways to slice how we evaluate the energy source. I want to just offer last call for questions before we move now to a few minutes for public comment. Are there members of the public that want to share a few words or questions or thoughts on anything we've covered to date at this point?
Hi, Sue, it's Pat Sagri. At some point, I'd like to say something.
This would be a good time.
Okay. And can it also include comments about what's happening next? Just, I did have a question on that report since there isn't another comment period later.
Oh.
Sure. I think that would be fine.
Kelly's comments, I just want to reinforce both she and you, Sue, have said about understanding the math of these various programs. I've tried to explain a number of times the savings from a heat pump water heater, and people just words isn't enough. I'm not sure what the graphics are that we need, but anyway, I just wanted to add some more to the need for helping people understand the math of how this helps. And also, I think there are a lot more opportunities for the incentives, like the kind of things that Capstone is working on. In the public engagement plan, most of it seems pretty good in terms of capturing the information. The piece that doesn't look clear is how and where will the readers see how the public's input may or may not have influenced the Climate Council's recommendations or priorities or not. Because I think that's really important, because that's supposed to be foundational to this whole process, is the public input matters. And if there's no way to really see that, it's one thing to collect it all, and all of that seems fine, but I'm not seeing where we're going to see if the council really pays attention and incorporates any of it or not. So that's just.
Thank you, Pat. And I appreciate that you've already explored what the rest of the group has obviously had opportunity to look at, but we're going to be hearing more, and we'll keep your question in mind. I'm not sure I know the answer. And I think even how it even goes more deeply than how the ideas are incorporated. It's also even our process of fleshing things out. I'm not sure the council has really brought that question into its thinking at this point. I don't know if any other council members have any reflection, or even Jane, if you have any thoughts, or David, about that important question.
I'll just say that's part of what's coming, right? In the conversation that's coming, I think, is to explore exactly that.
That'd be great. I couldn't see that piece. So and since there wasn't going to be an opportunity to ask afterwards, I'm sort of front loading here.
Okay.
Thank you.
And
Good.
yeah, Mary, can I add one thing, Sue, real quick? I just wanted to let you all know that that is something, the process of public engagement and the iterative nature of how we're going to be building the climate action plan with multiple components. We're going to start to really dive into that at the Climate Council meeting at the end of the month. And Marian and I have been thinking a lot about process and how we start to build that process so that we're not surprised when the fall comes about how much we have to be thinking about. So yes, David's right. Stay tuned and stay engaged, and we're definitely thinking about it a lot.
Great. Before we leave Jared, I think he had one more comment. Am I right? Did I just see that?
It was more of an invitation. I just wanted to thank you all again and say, that we're still very much at the beginning of a lot of our kind of energy equity research and analysis, and want to expand it. And we recognize that it's just a start and very limited. And we really want to hear from folks if there is additional research and analysis that you would find helpful. I really appreciated your comments, Mona, about different ways, including translation, to be able to share this information. And from you, Pat, about, what are the infographics that we might need to help make this, more relatable. If anyone has suggestions for us and the team, feel free to reach out to Cara, May, or I, because we really want to, our work is meant to be done at the service of Vermont and including the council. So, we've released our report, which means we've kind of started turning our attention in some ways to thinking about what research and analysis will go into the next one, and for, other, internship projects that we line up. So just wanted to offer that as well. Please don't hesitate to be in touch if we can be a resource.
And I want to just say thank you, Jared, Cara, and May, for being the resource of our state. That you're, bringing equity into the center of our analysis is critically important, obviously for this group, but beyond that. And we're very fortunate to have you as a convener and a neutral resource, and I think a place that's open to new ideas. So I'll just say thank you. And I will put in a plug. I know we sent the video. I think you'll learn, you now have met Jared and his work. I encourage you to see the video about some of his past and why, and his story, which I think is very compelling as well and relevant. Okay, I'm excited now for us to kind of turn our attention to the work that we also have responsibility as a subcommittee to help, stay in touch and guide to the best of our ability, the public engagement process, which I think you recall, we've met with Climate Access and RISE Consulting earlier to really think about how to do outreach early on, which they've done. And they'll describe that briefly, and then they're going to have turned that into a plan for the next X months of engagement. So I guess, who do I turn to? I just see you on my screen, Cara Pike, and I see Sarika. And Meredith, welcome.
Great. Well, thank you very much for having us. And we're excited to walk through the draft public engagement strategy with you and look forward to your input. So I'm going to give the presentation today, but Sarika and Meredith are both available when questions come up. So when we are working on this plan, we wanted to really sort of revisit what is the purpose of it. And so, you know, what we're really looking to do, if you could go to the next slide, is, as was just mentioned, engage Vermonters and often throughout the planning process. And we want to make sure we have a focus on including those who are typically underrepresented in decision-making, as well as those most at risk from climate change. And so that's really what we're aiming for. And what do we want from this engagement? What are we hoping to get? So it's really critical that we try and engage as many people as possible so that there's local concern and knowledge being incorporated into the plan. People are in the best position to really express the ways in which climate impacts affect their life and should be considered in developing the plan, and have ideas that perhaps the council folks moving ahead on the plan wouldn't think of themselves, just given that real local knowledge or sector knowledge. We want to really make sure we're taking time to understand of the needs of those most impacted and typically not at the table, understand how this issue affects them and the types of solutions that would be beneficial. And all the way through, we're aiming to build support for the adoption of the plan, the policies that go along with it, and really create a foundation for mobilizing the public as partners in implementing the plan when it's complete. So in terms of what the draft engagement plan will include, and what informed it, first of all. So we've met with, in our staff, Climate Council, and each of the subcommittees. We reviewed public opinion polling, the climate conversation in Vermont media, background reports. We held 2 different roundtables to get input on the public engagement plan. That was one focused for BIPOC sector leaders and another for sector leaders. And we interviewed a broad range of stakeholder groups. We're really pleased with the input from this group as well as the other subcommittees to really help us think through what are the different stakeholder segments we really need to make sure we're reaching out to as part of the process. And to date, through those interviews and the roundtables, we've already engaged 38 folks in helping to influence this strategy. While the conversation was focused on the public engagement plan, we did take the opportunity to also capture their concerns and ideas around solutions, which will be incorporated into the public engagement plan and the audience summary section. So in terms of the plan, it will include a section on framing. So how do we talk about this issue with Vermonters, with tips on how to tailor that with different audiences. And it's really important that we take the step to frame things in a way that are accessible for people and easy to understand. And one of the main things that's often missing in climate communications is really focusing on what is the relevance of this to people's lives. We want to position this as an issue of now. People are experiencing impacts, but also the solutions are here. And it's really important that we balance the threat with the solutions. So the draft engagement plan does include, as mentioned, an overarching framework. And we've organized that based on good narrative structure. You want to have the challenge, the choice, and the opportunity. And putting it in a story format really makes information much easier for folks to digest. We think it's a good idea to name the climate action plan, to give it more of a marketing name. This is something other states do, local governments. So for example, Maine Won't Wait is the name of their climate action plan. We like the idea of Vermont thrives. You know, we want to, of course, get through the challenge, but actually, you know, move beyond it to thriving. One of the things that's key is that we are very clear about the nature of the challenge, and not shy away from that. And per the point on equity, make sure that we're really emphasizing this issue doesn't impact everyone equally. The choice, what can we do? Well, in this case, we're positioning this around the choices that we've got this opportunity to create this plan, and everyone has a role to play. So this is the call to action for people to participate in the public engagement planning. And then finally, the opportunity, a resilient, thriving, and just Vermont future for Vermont. So this will help shape the communications, influence things such as content on the website. So moving to the next piece, when it comes to the engagement strategies, we really want to make sure that we're thinking of how do we open up conversations with people? How do we get into dialogue so we can explore the risks and responses versus prescribing to get that input around of the different climate impacts? What are people most concerned about? How is it affecting them? And also get that input on solutions. So conversations are really going to be key here. We were very pleased with the folks who we've already engaged that were shown on the previous slide, that all of the people who we either interviewed or spoke with in the roundtables are very interested and willing to help us amplify this out, to reach their networks, share email, social media, etc., potentially invite us into events, co-host events. There's a lot of interest from organizations out there that reach those different stakeholder segments to be part of the process with us. And in terms of, I think this is a good time to address the question, and I'll do so at a few other points in the presentation, but in terms of how that input will be used. It will be used alongside, you know, all of the technical analysis and whatnot that you've just been discussing as another factor to consider in terms of how to prioritize the strategies in the plan. And as we go through the different stages, I'll mention when we'll be coming back to the different subcommittees with summaries of what we've heard for their consideration. So moving ahead then, in addition to those organizations who are willing to work with us to amplify and engage people in this process, we're also really looking to the Climate Council and the subcommittees to help with this. So in some cases, we may have invitations, for example, from dairy farmers, and we need someone who can speak to their concerns and issues to go meet with them or attend an event they're having. We're going to want help with social media amplification, sharing out, you know, please come join this event or take this survey, etc., via email. And so we really do see it as a collaborative process and really look forward to engaging the Just Transitions subcommittee in that. And then, of course, we're working closely with the Agency of Natural Resources staff who are partners in shaping this work and will help us also push it out. So in terms of the different pieces then of the engagement plan, right now we're finalizing the written draft engagement plan. We will be sharing that via email with all subcommittees and asking for comments on that. So that'll be coming your way soon. And we've started working on a social media campaign and strategy for how to present the plan and engage people via the climate website for the state. We'll also be starting on a set of collateral materials. And so let's maybe move ahead to that slide, if you don't mind, Meredith. So that is going to include a number of tools that we'll use throughout the engagement process and also make available to you for engagement as well. So short summaries and fact sheets about climate change. We'll be drawing from the work of the subcommittees and the pathway work to outline what are, you know, the solutions that are being considered. There was a really good point made regarding the importance of graphics in helping to communicate things. So that's something we'll absolutely be looking at. Developing webinars that can be shared, presentation decks, for attending different community events, as much as possible. We want to get out there and go to where people are already gathering and have presence there. And then toolkits to help with those events. And then I also did want to note that we are working with A&R so that we can translate the key materials for this work. So then our next step will be to actively start the engagement. There are a number of different components. We say September, October, but the work has already begun, as mentioned, with those stakeholders we've already spoken with, as well as receiving an invitation to attend an on-farm event about carbon sequestration. So we'll definitely be taking advantage of those opportunities as we're in preparation mode, but then really looking to get things going, announcements about events in August, but then events taking place in September and October. So we'll be kicking off the social media campaign right after. We'll announce the events, but then we'll really announce the whole process and when we pass Labor Day. And then we'll be developing a survey, a simple online survey that can be hosted on the climate change website and shared and promoted via social media and partners. And that will be summarized. So that will be summarized and included in reports back to the subcommittees regarding the public engagement feedback. We'll also be holding events. We're going to hold 2 online public focus groups and 1 BIPOC dialogue. We will be promoting that, asking different organizations to help promote those as well. We want to work with local leaders and subcommittee members to host 4 regionally distributed in-person events now that we can do that again and set those up as dialogues so we can really have some rich exchanges. And then, as mentioned, we really are going to want to engage you and have your support when we do have opportunities and invitations to join different conferences or events. So we'll be creating a toolkit with materials for doing that. And then we'd be happy to work with you to prepare in advance if it's helpful for outlining things like talking points or a tailored presentation to that stakeholder group. We'll also be reaching back out to those organizations as well as others that were identified by the different subcommittees who are important to engage, but we didn't speak to about the public engagement plan. So we've got a sizable list now. We'll go back and ask folks if they can help amplify things out. And if they're up for holding their own event with their stakeholders about it, we'll have that toolkit available. And just to mention that we will be creating a feedback form so that even if it's not us or a subcommittee member, if it's another group holding their own event, we're still capturing that input, and we'll look at ways to do that digitally as well. So then we'll be in the planning process. So this is before the climate action plan has been drafted. We will be summarizing what we heard from all of that engagement. And we will be meeting with each of the subcommittees to go through what we learned and have a discussion regarding what that means for the different solution pathways that are being considered. So then the next phase is once the initial plan is out in December, we'll announce that. If you want to go ahead into the details of that. So we'll go ahead with a launch. We'll do media around it. We'll do a new batch of materials that reflect the plan itself and partner with groups to try and amplify once again. And we'll still be doing social media throughout. So at each of these points, like inviting people previously into the planning process, now announcing that the initial plan is out and inviting people to add their comments. Moving ahead, we'll update the website. And then we have another piece where we'll be using a deliberative dialogue tool online, and where people can weigh in on the impacts they're most concerned about, as well as the different strategies and how supportive they are of them. So that'll be another opportunity to get input. And again, all of this will be summarized and shared with subcommittee members. We'll have 3 events around the initial plan as well, hopefully in person, or we'll probably do a mix. I mean, we may, depending on the weather and whatnot, it might be advantageous just to do them all online, but we'll get to that when we're at that point. Again, we'll be providing support to partners to help amplify. And I do want to mention that in our budget, we do have funding for to help organizations who otherwise wouldn't be able to participate if they're not compensated for the time to do help with this outreach work. And then when at the end of the process, when comments have been considered and the plan is finalized, we'll do another push out at that point. And then we move into evaluation. So we'll be taking all of the comments from that last phase, summarizing it, sharing back with the council, and then looking across all the activities from the effort and seeing how we did, what worked, what didn't work, et cetera. And that also will be written up and shared with the council. So we talked a little bit about the timeline throughout the presentation, but you can see it here in terms of when things are going to be rolling out. So with that, I will just see if either Sarika or Meredith have anything that they want to add.
Not for me. Not at this point.
Well, that was a lot, and we thank you for the presentation. I really want us to have a conversation, and I want to ask if there are any questions. I know, Beverly, did you want to share your comment or your thought?
I just wondered how we were going to do an online survey to people who are not familiar with social media, who don't operate on computers, who may not even have a computer that's in their language. How are we going to get surveys to these people and encourage them to put their thoughts into this process?
We'll have a print version of as well that people could just fill out. And again, really looking to different organizations to help with that. So, you know, to share that if they are holding an event, to bring the survey and ask folks who are attending to fill it out. So that's a key way. And then I think that's also why those 4 in-person discussions are so important. So we're thinking about, you know, those who wouldn't want to engage online, really prefer rolling up their sleeves and having a more in-depth conversation.
And would the surveys be printed in different languages?
That's our goal.
Thank you.
Are you thinking of hiring interpreters for, you know, to facilitate the conversation whenever you do in-person meetings?
Yeah, so for the in-person, they'll be facilitated by Sarika and I, but we'll also be looking to organizations within the region that we're holding the event to see if they would like to co-host, invite their stakeholders to it. But Sarika and myself would be doing the facilitating and Meredith providing support.
I have a question or a comment, I guess. I can see that you're really looking also to us for support and leadership in directing some of the outreach to our respective kind of communities. And I think that's great, but and I think we as an as a subcommittee will talk about ways that we think we can advance your work. Would it be your expectation that we would then be presenting, or that you would present if we were to initiate an event on our own, or invite you to an existing event that we think would be beneficial?
What we've imagined is, if there's an existing event that would be great, is having someone from one of the subcommittees attend, and really looking at who's in the best position to really speak to whatever the particular focus of the event is, or the participants who will be gathering. So that is absolutely work that we are hoping subcommittee members can do along with A&R staff. The events, the 3 online and the 4 in person, will be the ones leading those, and they really will be mostly dialogue versus a large presentation. Yeah.
We'll be putting together a toolkit of materials so that you'll be going into those meetings with a presentation deck that you can use as a jumping off point. You could always tailor for a specific purpose, and other fact sheets and materials, talking points and things too.
People have thoughts, comments, concerns that this is a really important time for us to weigh in to the degree we have ideas. Beverly, I see you raising your hand. I don't know if someone else is.
One of my thoughts is that if we as subcommittee members are going to be putting all this time into helping organize and coordinate, events, or even presenting at events, not all of us are on someone's payroll.
Yeah, and I don't think anyone should feel like they have to. It's really, if it's something of interest, if you do have capacity. I know we're not able to use the partner support for council subcommittee members just because of how things are set up. And so that's really unfortunate, and I appreciate you bringing that up. So it really is just if you're able and you have the capacity, but I'm not trying to put this out there as an expectation that everyone do this.
I want to just throw in that I'd like us, maybe not now, maybe at our next meeting, but to talk about exactly your point, Beverly. And I'm raising it because early on in this process, I worked hard to raise some money because I didn't know if there was going to be adequate outreach. So there may be some resources we could support our members. I'd have to really understand this better, but there may be ways that we could support time and investment in outreach for greater diversity and inclusion in our climate council that could subsidize that to some degree. So I'm going to put that on the table for further discussion, because I think it's essential that we somehow fund people's time in this work. And I know that it was the intent or hope that the consultants could do that. And there are a host of I'll just call them legal reasons why that wouldn't be possible, but maybe there are other ways to do that.
So Jane has her hand up.
And Kelly put hers up first, so Kelly can go first.
I had a different question. So Jane, I don't know if you're going to talk on that.
Sure. A couple things, 2 points about that. One, I think we're very much thinking about existing events, not asking subcommittee members to go out and organize events in support of this. So we're trying to have the right people attend and elevate the work at the events that matter or that could elevate the work in this way. So we're thinking about, you know, like the Ag Agency is another one. Next week, they're doing a low carbon workshop or in an introduction, and they already have bringing together a lot of dairy farmers as well. And so we can be there, and they're thinking about how this impacts them and how the climate action plan will impact them. I also too just wanted to speak to payment and just remind people that when you're not meeting one, that per diems are eligible to all of you, even though we weren't able to elevate the amount to $100. And there'll be an email coming out from Marion in the coming days around her ability to help support people in the backlog process. If you haven't taken advantage of per diems to date, she can help you take advantage of the money that you're entitled to up until this point for your service. And I encourage people to act on that sooner rather than later, so it doesn't go on for a long time, even more of a burden to catch up, kind of speak. So Marion will be sending out an email from that, and then we can speak to those details of that at coming subcommittee meetings. And that those per diems are also applicable to work outside of meetings. So you get the $50 per diem for these meetings, but you also get a prorated rate when you're doing the work of the Climate Council in outside of these subcommittee meetings or council meetings. And so it's not a straight $50, it's an hourly rate, but that also would apply if you were giving presentations or speaking on behalf of the Climate Council's work outside of this. So we can talk about that too.
Well, that's really important and great to hear. Kashka, did you have something you wanted to add? I see you made a note and then if
I did. I just want to piggyback off of, I don't think this is the right time and place to speak to this, but I would like to speak about that. And it is a little bit of a concern, I think, especially for us who would like to be more involved. But it is a bit time consuming when you put all the other things and life and job and work, and we are just kind of outsiders coming in. So I wish that I had more time and financial ability to be more involved, but to speak more to this, I would appreciate it. Yes.
So I'm going to put a pin on that. This is going to be a much more significant topic at our next meeting, so that we can really dig in and see what we can do to help elevate the voices of the folks who we want to reach, but we are uniquely engaged, but would need probably compensation for our additional time.
I want to.
Go ahead, Mona.
Yeah, I think for me, what I can do, I only speak two languages, English and Arabic. All what I can do, if you have any pamphlets or any surveys that need to be translated into Arabic language, I can do this, no problem.
Yeah, and it occurs to me that smaller house gatherings, even, I know Beverly, I've been to your gathering, and I suspect that might be a great way and forum to have a deeper conversation. So, you know, I know that piggybacking on existing events is a lot easier, but I don't know if it is the kind of event that you can engender real conversation. So we can continue this discussion. But I didn't want to, Kelly, you're next.
Just a quick question, and forgive me if you said this already, but for Kara, I was wondering, you were talking about having materials I'm hoping to host an event, and you were talking about having some materials, and I was wondering about timing on supporting materials so that, because we were thinking about doing something next month in August. So I don't know if that timing is, I mean, I can still do something and then do a follow-up, but I wanted to know about materials that you might have available for us and what the timing of that would be.
Yeah, I think if your event is in August, then we'd be able to have materials by then. Do you know what date your event is at?
No, we were just thinking the first half of the month. So I could be more specific, but that's sort of where we are in the planning stage.
Okay, great. Yeah, I mean, our next step, once we get the draft plan out to you, is to start working on materials. Yeah. And we do need, though, we're obviously, you know, we're using the work of the subcommittees around the pathways, so we have to wait for that to come our way. But it should be fine because that's expected at the end of this month.
I wanted to respond to Virginie's question about interpreters. So we're open to having interpreters at the events. And I think what I'm thinking of now that we need to resolve is how to assess needs for interpretation beforehand so that we have the right people there with the right language skills. And then another way of reaching language communities is to have events in the language that are tailored for those groups. So so we'll be thinking about that as we finalize the plan. And I thank you for that question.
Thank you.
All right. I think there's a lot to come and details such as who reviews the outreach materials. I suspect that may be a responsibility of A&R and our staff at this point. Maybe they can also share with our subcommittee. Good suggestion, Pat. I want to just check in, last sort of moment for check-in or response. And thank you for the good work you've done. I know you spent a lot of time meeting a lot of people, and I'm interested, did those meetings and stakeholder groups offer new ideas and perspectives to you that have influenced your plan?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And, you know, I mean, both just from such a broad range of folks who we spoke with, the passion for place, you know, the passion about Vermont itself, and the desire for this plan to be bold, you know, to really meet the aims of the legislation. It was really exciting to hear. And we got a lot of, you know, detailed input and offers like, oh, we're holding this event. Can you have anyone from the council go? Or I meet with this group from all these industries every month. You know, is there a way to connect around that? So a lot of willingness to partner with us in the process. So it was really actually all very exciting conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just add a dominant theme that stood out to me was this idea of wanting accessible climate solutions. It really amplifies the message that Jared was sharing at the beginning. And Jared, I watched the video earlier today. I highly recommend everyone. So the synergy between the story Jared shares in the YouTube video and what we heard from Vermonters from all over the state and all different backgrounds is really strong.
Jared or someone from EAN, perhaps add the video in the chat if you could. All right, thank you, team, Climate Access and Rise Consulting. Really great work, very exciting as we envision kicking this thing off, even though you don't have the content. We've thought through a lot of good strategies, and I know we need to hopefully do our best to play a role in expanding to the communities represented in this wonderful group. All right.
Very much.
I think our next piece of the agenda just is kind of checking in on report backs from our subcommittee members visiting other and participating in other subcommittees. And so I think, can I just ask for volunteers who have something to report to step forward? Because I can't remember who's on what base on that. Go for it, Kelly.
I pretty brief, because I think hopefully people will be able to tune into the full Climate Council meeting. Cross-sector mitigation mostly went over the presentation that's going to be made to the full Climate Council 2 Mondays from now, the 26th, I think. But the different task leads have looked at different areas of where our reductions need to be. We got some initial presentations from them. We went over a lot of their work and talked about different various things. So there's going to be sort of like a revisiting those, packaging them, and making them into a presentation that will be hopefully really interesting and informative and easy to understand at the council meeting. And of course, if you can't attend that, there will be slides and there'll be a video. But I think that was the main thing I got from the meeting, which was sort of talking through this. There was definitely some interesting discussion, but I don't know that there was anything other than that is particularly of note. Jared, you're here. Were you there? No, were you not there? Anyway, Jane, Jared couldn't make it. I was like, Chris isn't here. I can't call on him. I don't know, Jane. Anyway, I think I got the gist of it for you all. It was mostly just business type of stuff. So I think the results of it will be at the full climate council meeting. We'll see some more of what they were talking about and all of the great work of the different task leads. So to refresh, and basically talking about electricity, the thermal sector, transportation, and then non-energy. So that would be like emissions from agriculture and things like that. So how we can do different things to reduce in all of those different areas. So it'll be really interesting to see the report that they put together and the different suggestions they have.
Thank you. And I would say, just so everyone is tuning in, while we're doing this work, the other subcommittees, some of which we're connecting with, are developing what are called pathways, sort of strategies, big picture thinking about their area of sectoral expertise. Anyone else from another subcommittee? I think we have somebody who's going to another subcommittee. Anyway.
I know Kashka's here. I can speak to science and data. Also, Jared is here, although I don't think you were there this last week because you're on vacation. But it's just last week we had a presentation from the Vermont Climate Assessment from folks from UVM on the work that they've been doing, which was really interesting to hear the way they've looked at systems and how climate impacts have sort of various effects throughout the whole system. That presentation I could share in the chat is available if folks are interested. And then a lot of the work has now been divided into task groups to help support some of the work of the consultants with the review of the greenhouse gas inventory, review of sort of the carbon budget task, and then also looking, I feel like there's one other, Jane can fill me in if I'm blanking, another major task the consultant is working on. And so that was science and data didn't meet this week, that was 2 weeks ago. So I'll be meeting next week, I think, with a bit more information on the modeling that's going on and updates, I think, maybe from the consultants. But Jared could probably speak to that bit.
Yeah, I would just add one other specific update, if that's okay, which is the consultants are going to share an initial outline for an important question that will inform a lot of the analysis about the greenhouse gas emissions reduction pathways, including this question of what is cost effective. And that is an overview and actually a survey with committee members on this topic of the social cost of carbon. And basically what that is referring to is how do we, and it's really important in terms of the concept of intergenerational equity. How do we value an investment now versus a cost or a harm in the future? And how much should we be willing to invest now to reduce emissions, to prevent, to help, play our part in preventing future harm? And how do we assess the trade-offs of that? So, I think it can be framed sometimes as a pretty narrow economic question, but I think it's a really important moral and ethical question that regards that it has to do with intergenerational equity. So if folks are interested in that, of course, they're all open and you'd be welcome to join our next Science and Data Subcommittee meeting. Will be on next Wednesday, the 21st at 1:30. But I'm sure Claire will be able to report back if you're not able to attend.
Well, and I think the other point is that many of us, some of us will be able to attend this Climate Council meeting on the 26th, but it will be recorded. And I think that this will be a meeting that will be really worth looking at the recording, because I think it's sort of the culminating presentation of where the other subcommittees are at this point, and will become, I think, the substance of the first round of kind of going out to the communities. All right. I think we should move on to see if Jane has some updates from the director, if there's something we all need to know from your vantage point.
Well, first I want to thank Jared because I had my hand up actually to speak to the social cost of carbon component because I do really think that is very interesting to this group, and just also want to build on what Jared said and suggest that after it goes to the subcommittee, there's going to be some outreach and ask of counselors to also participate in a survey about the social cost of carbon. So and we're not quite sure 100% how we're going to roll that out with the substantial background that's needed to really understand and do the survey. So if you're at all interested in learning more and like having that back and forth with the Science and Data Committee and Subcommittee, knowing that your council member are going to be asked to participate in this, I encourage you to tune into the Science and Data meeting next Wednesday, but it's really exciting. So I think that all of the updates that you've heard, and Sue, your astute recognition of this sort of pivotal moment that we're at with the first batch of pathways, strategies, and actions. Really, the presentations will focus on the pathways and strategies from all of the subcommittees. Is really an exciting component to be at right now. And the wrap up of that at the council meeting will really be still at a high level where we're trying to highlight any obvious gaps in the subcommittees. What have we not focused on yet that we think should be in the climate action plan? And then think about where there's some obvious inherent conflict perhaps between pathways and strategies of different subcommittees, like renewable energy siting with farmland conservation for sequestration, obvious things like that. And then also try to start to elevate cross-cutting strategies so that we can really start to hone in on areas that are going to have multiple co-benefits. And Marian and I are thinking a lot about the process that we pivot to after that sort of culmination and how we start to roll that out and create some clear expectations of the work that's ahead for the Climate Council. And just because there's going to be a lot coming in at the 11th hour. And we're also since you heard about the public engagement, thinking a lot about how we can learn and hear from the public engagement that Climate Access and RISE is leading in an iterative process so that we're not getting it all in October and then somehow trying to incorporate that into our thinking around pathway strategies and actions, that we can have real-time engagement updates. And, you know, there's already stakeholder engagement set up all for the month of August around the cross-sector mitigation components of the work in partnership with the Public Service Department. So that's information we can take in and use right away to digest and think about how it informs our strategies. And I think that was really astute, whether it was Pat or someone else who commented earlier on being really transparent on not only getting that engagement back, but recognizing how we use it and adapt based on what we're learning from the public. And that's just as true with all of the technical analysis that's going to be coming in, as well as the work that we continue to think about how we use with respect to the guiding principles and scoring rubric, which I know that I'm hoping at our next subcommittee meeting with all of you, we can review a draft scope of work for what would be additional contractual service to help facilitate the conversations with the subcommittees and ultimately also with the council about how we reach some sort of benchmark at a minimum for the equity work, recognizing that there's a lot of things we're trying to package together in the climate action plan. So lots happening, always is, and I think it's going to be a very busy fall, but it's really great. And I invite Marian to fill in on anything I might have missed at this point, but otherwise really looking forward to the next few months and grateful to have Marian here to really be helping me think about and us think about process for how we'll roll this work up and think about a climate action plan come the fall.
Yeah, nothing to add, Jane. I think just a lot still to come and a lot still to think about, but that's why we're excited to be working with you all and getting your input and feedback on the process thus far. So looking forward to it.
Great, thank you both. We just have a couple minutes, and I want to start by saying we need to approve or agree to the minutes. Every meeting, Amanda is dutifully writing perfect minutes, and I want you to know that the co-chairs review them, as does Jane and Marion. But does anyone have any comments or suggestions or concerns about the minutes of the last meeting? Hearing none, we'll agree to accept them as final minutes. And we always thank you, Amanda, for doing such a great job. The last thing is really just to touch base quickly on our goals for our next meeting, which is on, I believe, the 29th, so 2 weeks from today. We've just heard that Jane and Marion will want us to review a scope of work for how do the subcommittees get facilitated support, actually integrating our guiding principles into their pathways and strategies. So that's one thing. I think we talked earlier today about how do we help fund public engagement that we might initiate, and how do we get compensation, not just for participants, but for those of us who aren't paid to do this work, but want to do more of it if possible. And maybe other reflections on the public engagement plan and ideas that we might want to generate or brainstorm together. And then the third thing is, Sarah, maybe, we still have a few more comments to integrate into our guiding principles. Is that right?
Yeah, so we talked about those at our last meeting. Claire presented those. And so our next step is to pull together, I think we did want to make some small changes to our draft writing principles. And then this is not, I think that we needed to make any changes, but we should put together a response. Distracted by Kelly's baby. Who's gorgeous, by the way. But okay, going back. So anyway, I think that at our next meeting, we should look at those, discuss them, and finalize. So I'm happy. I'm sure if anyone is willing to work with me on taking what we discussed at our last meeting and working on those proposed changes before our next meeting.
So you're looking for volunteers. It was a little hard to hear you. There's some pieces that we need to integrate into our guiding principles, and Sarah would like 1 or 2 volunteers to maybe work with her, right?
So sorry, my phone died, so I'm on my computer audio. Yes, that's right, Sue. That's right. I need volunteers to work with me on drafting those changes.
All right, so she's going to wrangle a few of you if you don't, you're going to have to be voluntold maybe. All right, I think it's 6 o'clock, 6:01. What a great meeting. Thank you all for being here and engaging with us. Thank you, Mona, for joining us. We'll be in touch offline about whether you want to continue on this journey. Any last comments on this hot but beautiful July evening? All right, well, let's go enjoy it, and we'll meet again in 2 weeks, and I'm sure we will be connecting through email in between. Thank you very, very much, everybody. Bye-bye.
Have a good day.
Thank you. Take care, everybody.